We'll do it now. Excited. This is Mark's Murder Mystery Monday.
Welcome to Mark's
Red Rum.
Murder
Red Rum.
Mystery
Red Rum.
Monday.
Once again, everybody, for Courtney.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. So the story that we're talking about today takes place in the late 19th century. So I did not have as many visuals available, unfortunately.
Okay.
So some of them are artistic renderings and others are photos of similar situations, but not of the exact situation that we're going to cover today. But we're talking about Sarah Emily Howe. And Sarah Emily Howe was a woman who in the late 19th century was very progressive and opened a bank that was available to and serviced only the interests of women. The women had to be single or widowed. They could not have a relationship with a man.
Oh, wow.
And
because it was thought single women needed a place where they weren't. I mean, everything in the patriarchy was really conspiring against them.
Yep.
So this was a good thing, a righteous thing, it seemed.
Yeah. And so glad things have changed 200 plus years later, by the way. So
I think
glad.
you're being sarcastic right now.
Yep. But women were the property of their husbands. So once you were married, you weren't allowed to own land. You weren't allowed to have money. Sometimes it feels like that. But, and so she opened a bank to service the needs and interests of women. But as I mentioned, you had to be single or you had to be widowed, but you could not be shacking up or married.
Okay.
And she offered a quite healthy return on your investments. So she promised women that were depositing their money into her bank an 8% return every month. And she gave you 3 months up front when you put your money in the bank. So let's say you put in $100, which is like $1 zillion now. You would get $24 back up front when you put in the $100 when you deposited that.
So that seems like an incredible
deal.
I
mean, like who's not gonna take that deal? And so if you let your deposit mature, so it was in the bank for a year, you would get $96 back on your 100. So women were flocking to do this.
Let me just stop you and just say the finances were there, meaning that what you just described. The money was there. There was an economic inducement, if you will, to be part of this. And also, societally, I think if you're a woman at that time, you feel like, God, I'm really getting screwed everywhere.
Yeah.
My only legitimacy is through this. If I hook up with a guy. And finally, there's a place where I can put my money, and she also is single, the person who's running it. So you're welcomed here. Yeah.
I mean, look at what we had to wear to go to the bank. All right. Tough times. There were no sweatpants and hat and
you
running
don't
out
miss
to
the
the bank.
fashions back then?
No, I mean, look at this. This is insanity.
You didn't want a hoop skirt, maybe?
I mean, I'm down for a good hoop skirt, but not for an occasional errand run, right? There's a place and time for that. So she offers 8%, and women were like, they were mortgaging their furniture, which I guess was a thing back then, and mortgaging their homes. And women from around the country were sending in money because they were hearing from other women about this incredible opportunity. And it's exactly what you think it was, which is that this was a massive Ponzi scheme that was being had before Charles Ponzi was even born, in the same city in which he would build one of his major Ponzi schemes.
There's Ponzi.
Yeah.
Charles Ponzi. If you've always wondered what he looks like, there he is on YouTube.
So it's literally named after him.
Shout out.
Sarah Howe was actually perpetrating this crime before he was even born.
Wow.
And so she bought a storefront and created a bank. Now this is not her bank, but this, if you're watching or looking at the screen, this is a similar bank that would have happened. This is in 1900. So she was doing this 20 years earlier. But in 1880, her husband is honorably discharged from the Union Army at the end of the Civil War, and she moves to Boston with him. This is around 1850s-ish, and she becomes a fortune teller and a clairvoyant. actually. Those
Literally,
were
the woman who opened a bank
Yeah.
is first a clairvoyant and fortune teller.
Yes, and she was a doctor,
There's never
but
been
not
anything
medically
like
trained.
this.
That's
And
not fake. That's real.
She was enterprising because she saw an opportunity to basically steal a lot of people's money, and so she opens this bank in 1879 in Boston. By the time she was caught, 1,200 women roughly had given her about $500,000, which I think, based on inflation, is like 15 million roughly today.
Wow.
But yeah, she was buying mansions with cash. So she bought one mansion that was $40,000. She paid $20,000 up front in $100 bills. She would have these lavish parties.
The Woman's Bank of Boston, as it was called.
Yes. So the first initial bank was Ladies Deposit Company.
I see.
But I think that they also sort of called it in the press Ladies Boston Bank.
I see.
But she appointed it really well. She decorated it in the very spirit and nature of women, and she serviced and let only women into the bank. In fact,
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
Yeah, I'm sure.
the only reason that she got caught is because a reporter tried to go in. They wouldn't let him in because he was a man. So he dresses up as a woman, and he goes back and he goes into the bank and he starts asking questions.
Oh.
Yeah,
Wild
exactly.
idea. Just
Yeah,
wait, what?
Yeah.
I know. And so he finds out some information, and then he writes a story in January of 1880, basically saying like, this woman's full of it.
Wow.
And actually, what happens is she gains more notoriety and popularity through that article, and more women come to her and give her more money. It wasn't until September of 1880, when a series of articles came out calling her a fraudster, that eventually in October there was a run on the bank. And as you imagine, since she had, I think, $196,000 that she would have owed depositors, she was arrested because she didn't have the money.
But it's interesting because they don't have, at that time, they don't have the kind of regulatory system that we have now. Even so, a lot today is people get away with.
Clearly.
But back then, in the late 1800s, there was nothing.
No, and there was, well, I mean, she was a clairvoyant, a doctor, and a banker. So clearly there was no oversight happening in one of the in a fairly large city, right, in Boston. But there was also a lack of, there wasn't media, right? So the newspapers were writing about this. But what is interesting is she's found guilty of basically collecting money by malicious means, and she goes to jail for 3 years. And when she gets out, she opens another bank in the same city.
Wow.
And part of the issue was there were so many immigrants coming to the U.S. that there was a lot more there were more people that she could take advantage of that hadn't heard about what she had been doing 3 years earlier. So she opens the second bank. She's found out after a year. She then goes and opens a third bank in Chicago.
Well, this is a key thing because back then you didn't have what we have. There's no
there's no Mark Thompson show.
There's no Mark Thompson show. Without
Thompson
the Mark Thompson show to connect people and get them the word about some kind of fraud like this, they move in and they want it, and they succumb to the same deal that she had, the same fraud that she had pulled off, and that actually got her jailed.
I think too that when I was listening to some of the reporting on this, it was interesting because they were saying how women were thought to be morally superior, which I thought was interesting. And so she used that to perpetuate these crimes on other women, kind of like, I know how challenged you are in certain areas. I'm here to help you. I'm also a woman. You can trust me.
Sure.
And so it was fairly easy for her to continue to build these Ponzi schemes, not only in the same city she was at, but in Chicago. But eventually she's found out. She actually ends her life, meaning she dies in Boston, where this all originated, as a clairvoyant and a fortune teller, but with government aid. So she's effectively living in a boarding home. She's penniless. and she ends up passing there. Yeah.
Wow.
But it's a really crazy story, especially in the context that it was such a massive fraud and it was happening even before Charles Ponzi was born. He was born in 1882 in Italy. That Sarah Howe was in fact building this incredible fraud, and so I thought
think
it was
it's
such a
great
compelling story. Yeah.
Look, YouTube user said this is my favorite MMM story yet.
Oh wow,
Yeah.
I love that. That's
So
great.
I mean, I think you can from time to time on here
Hi,
come
Marks.
on with like true crime stories that don't necessarily end up with some grisly murder. You know?
And then she's murdered. We're rewriting history.
But it is
yeah.
amazing that, and this is worth. There's so many things that are kind of, if you will, takeaways. There's so many takeaways from the story, but I really think it's true that when you feel that someone is part of your community and you feel as though you're something of an underdog in the community, specifically here, a woman, single woman. You feel as though there's so few lifeboats for you in the world. And here is this other single woman. She's opened up this bank. She's given you this good return. Like, we're a community that's going to take care of each other. And you go to it that way. And now let's cut to contemporary America, where you had the same thing in a Ponzi scheme developed by who? Bernie Madoff. Bernie Madoff was widely regarded, and there's more going on there, but a major authority, ran the NASDAQ, all this other stuff, and respected on Wall Street. But among those who were most hurt by Bernie Madoff were the people in his community, the Jewish community.
Yes.
Many universities, I think, that were connected to the Jewish community, they had their entire endowment in Bernie Madoff. So there are actually eerie similarities to a community that feels as though, well, they'll take care of us because they understand that,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that absolutely. And obviously, like, that's the case here. And it's interesting because, as I mentioned earlier, she only worked with single women or widowed women because she didn't want men evaluating or taking into consideration what she was building.
Sure.
There was the sense that they would be able to determine that it was a fraud. But you're right. I mean, she perpetuated this crime because she was able to go and have women trust her at a time when women had no options. I mean, you had no options. And actually, most of the women who gave her money were on sort of the lower socioeconomic range.
Sure.
But I'll tell you this. Be the first in a Ponzi scheme, not the last.
The first people were paid out.
The first people got paid out.
Same thing with Madoff.
Yeah.
In fact, that was one of the things
So-
the government clawed back a lot of that Madoff
Yeah.
money. If you haven't seen the Madoff documentaries, it's really powerful stuff.
Yeah.
Roberta said, Ms. Howe gives psychics and clairvoyants a bad name.
I agree with you. I agree with
Was
you.
her husband in on it too, Cabra? No, she wasn't married. That's the
She
point.
was. She was married.
I'm so sorry. I missed
So,
that.
part of why she was married. She was actually married twice, and one marriage was annulled and one was divorced. And the reason that's important is because she got married a third time, and that was very rare in the late 19th
see.
century. And so they actually used that in some of the media against her character because she had so many failed marriages. But she was married. She was married to a man who was in the Union Army. And after he was honorably discharged, they moved to Boston. Part of why they think she was married is because technically, I guess, based on the laws that were in the U.S. at that time,
I know what
she
this
couldn't
is.
perpetuate a crime because she was married. And so her husband would have been the fall guy. But yes, she was married to Florimond Howe.
I didn't realize that.
But
I
I
thought that
think-
she was single, yeah.
I think what happened was they made some sort of deal with him where he just kind of left. Like, he wasn't part of the trial. He didn't really contribute much. I don't know how the government sort of handled that relationship, but effectively he left and she endured the trial herself.
Wow.
Not endured. She needed to
She went
needed
through
to go
it.
to jail.
She went through
Yeah,
it
she
herself.
went through it. So
Courtney, what can I say?
oh,
A
thank you for
very
having me.
nice ride through a huge ripoff back in the 1800s that preceded Charles Ponzi.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. In the
Sad
same
that
city.
it wasn't named for her. Of course, they name it for the guy.
I mean, I know. It's just the
What was her last
patriarchy.
name again?
Howe.
Howe.
Howe. Sarah Emily Howe.
I can see Ponzi has a better sort of ring to it.
It's
But,
true. She never. People tried to find her toward the end of her life and confront her. She never admitted to it ever. She blamed it on a lot of other people.
Sure.
But yeah.
As one does.
Yeah.
Julie says, super interesting topic, Courtney. Courtney, you should consider this.
I
Broadening
know.
from murder to other true crime.
Well, Mark's in charge, so
I'm giving you the green light. Please, please.
He's not as big a fan of the true crimes that involve
Murder. I don't
murder.
like grisly
So,
stuff. It's true.
This might be something that we look.
Yeah. But I'm glad you do
explore.
recognize that I'm in charge. It's about time someone come in
Let
here.
me finish that.
Do you know
for
who
the
I
show
am?
only?
I'm kind of a big deal.
All right. Thank you, Courtney.
Murder Mystery Monday on the Mark Thompson Show.
How about it for Courtney, everybody? Yeah. Cool to have her in. I know. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.